you run the calculations, it's either the biggest or the second biggest such area in Britain. The other one is Morecambe Bay. And those sand flats sustain the bird population. And Mike is going to talk after me, and he's going to focus, I'm sure, on the ecology. What I'm going to concentrate on here are some other aspects of that intertidal area. Yes. Okay. When you get out on the wash, what you come across is this wonderful mosaic of sand and mud and water. Now, sea level rise has been going on slowly for centuries. And in somewhere like the Wash, the mud flats have kept pace with that. In comes the tide, and with that tidal flow comes the sand and mud carried into the Wash. And that then builds up, and the Wash gets, the sediments get higher and higher and keep pace with tidal sea level rise. So one concern I have, that the moment those sediments are keeping pace, but almost all of the sediment that does build up is coming from offshore. Very little comes down the four rivers. So most of it comes from Holderness or the Cromer-Sheringham area. If you put a obstruction or a barrier or an impediment of any sort across the Wash and take tidal energy out of it, you will take flow out. Once you slow the flow, the suspended sediment will drop out of the water, probably on the seaward side of the structure. And you will have less sand and mud coming into the Wash. The mud flats will slowly subside and effectively drown. Sea level rise is also going to increase in speed because of climate change. So the first thing I would say is that I believe a structure of almost any sort, certainly any substantial sort, and certainly the kind of structure that's required during the building phase that Andy talked about earlier on, is going to threaten the integrity of the mud flats themselves. They will simply not be there, I fear, and that's where the wading birds and the seals live. Second point is we estimate at the moment the Wash, in that burying sediment, in that sediment buildup, it traps 11,000 tonnes of carbon a year. Now that's actually not much compared to British emissions, but at least it's a start to offsetting some of the climate change pressures we face. And to disturb it and to potentially destroy it seems a retrograde step at the very best. Processes in those sediments also trap quite a lot of the nitrogen and phosphorus that comes down the rivers into the Wash. And that means that nitrogen and phosphorus doesn't go into the North Sea, where otherwise it would contribute to the eutrophication pressure. By eutrophication, I mean things like algal blooms within the North Sea. So if you threaten the sediment supply, you threaten the mud flats and sand flats, and you threaten that carbon and nutrient retention. My third point goes back to those rivers. The East Anglian rivers, the Great Ouse, Nene, Welland and Witham, have some of the highest nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations of any rivers in Britain. Talk about why that is, but that is simply the case. There are algal blooms within the rivers, above Denver Sluice, for instance, but there aren't any in the Wash because the water, as somebody commented earlier on, is very rapidly flushed out of the Wash. So there's no time for the algae to build up, and that nutrient doesn't get left in the Wash. If you put any sort of barrier across the Wash, you are going to trap the water behind that barrier, and slowly those nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations are going to build up, as somebody commented earlier on. That is inevitable. And with that comes the threat of all sorts of generally eutrophication problems. There could be algal blooms, there could be harmful algal blooms, there could be smells. This stuff suppresses other biological activities, so you will damage the ecology of the region. Beyond this green lake that will develop behind will also be mud flats that are regularly coated in this high nutrient water. The experience of places like Chichester Harbour is that what then happens is large mats of filamentous algae develop. Not phytoplankton now, but sheets of kind of a seaweed-like stuff that covers the sediment and will eventually block out the life within the sediment, and it's been shown in places like Chichester and Poole Harbour to suppress the bird populations as well. Again, the barrier, it is an inevitable consequence of any sort of barrier holding the water back in order to generate the tide that you will risk these problems. And that's it from me. I'll try to keep to time. Thank you very much.